everyone, welcome back to the Zinnia Patch quilt tutorial. We're going to start piecing our flower blocks. We're going to begin by piecing our flower petals. So here we are taking piece L and E, and we are laying the E piece on top of the L piece, and we're going to pin that together. And I pin perpendicular to the edge of the fabric. It just makes it easier when sewing. And you see we're going to leave a little point at each end, and that's allowing for your 1/4 inch seam allowance, and so that everything matches up when you unfold it. Now we're going to take piece M and piece F, and this is oriented a little bit differently than with piece L and E. This time you'll notice both triangles are facing basically the same direction, if that makes sense. Again, pin in a couple of places, and you're still going to leave those that point really just at the bottom there, just a tiny bit of fabric sticking out there. Now we're going to move over to the sewing machine, and we're just going to sew along the edge, leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and backstitch at the beginning and end, just to keep things from coming apart later on. My presser foot is a 1/4 inch wide and allows for that seam allowance. You may want to check yours, that's not always the case. And you'll notice we have half of our block there. We're going to move over to piece M and F. Again, back stitching at the top and bottom. And be careful not to sew over your pins, because they can break and needles can go flying. That's not a good thing. Okay, and notice how this block looks a little bit different than the first one. Now we're going to press them. I press the seams towards the color 1 fabric. With the triangles, I think this just works a little bit better. And this helps later on when you go to line everything up. You will notice, and I'll show you later on, you have a nice point and guide to go by. And just go by your lines of stitching so that you're not cutting off a point when you sew everything together. And I'll show you what I'm talking about later on. And I just use a little starch, and it just helps keep the pressing nice and neat. It looks like I'm melting my spray bottle. I'm not. Okay, now we're going to pin the other side to this block. And this is another E piece. And again, just lining it up the way you did the first one. And pin, still leaving that point at the top and the bottom to allow for your seam allowance. And just notice the positioning of the triangles on the different pieces, the L and the M pieces, because we are doing different types of triangles here. You'll notice that the F pieces that are being sewn to the M piece are basically facing the same direction as the M piece, which is not typical when you're piecing triangles. So just notice that when you start piecing. It can be a little bit confusing since you are using 2 different techniques. And again, just sew along the edges. Somehow neglected to film sewing the L triangle, but I think you know what to do there. Okay, and now we're going to press again. And we're not quite finished with the M and F pieces. we're going to still need to add our G triangle to the bottom of that to form the square. Okay, so here we have our two F pieces. So into our M triangle, now we're going to grab our G triangle, and you want to find the center. So I just fold it in half, finger press that, and then I'm going to do the same with the larger piece. Find the center of that M triangle, and then we're going to pin that together, lining up your creases, which I somehow did not show here. I'm sorry about that. And just sew along the edge there. Now we're going to take that over and press it. Again, pressing towards the color one piece. And this is a clapper I use to get a nice crisp seam. And now we're going to trim our blocks. And this one is not going to be perfectly square. We are trimming this piece for the wall hanging and crib size. It's going to be 6.5 by 5 inches. So make note of that on the pattern. And you just want to find that center. Of course, your center will be the triangle point, and just lay that. I'm using the center square of my cutting mat, and you want to find what the halfway point is there for the 6.5 inch width. Line your point up, and then this piece will be cut into a square, and this one is going to be cut 5 by 5 for the wall hanging and crib size. Again, just making sure to center it. You're wanting to make sure to leave a 1/4 inch seam allowance on every point of the triangle. And same with the previous triangle, I didn't mention that. Make sure to leave a 1/4 inch at the top of that triangle between the point and the edge of the color one fabric. I just rotate mine. I find that easier for cutting. You can get the rulers that are square, and it makes it a little bit easier, but this is what I have to work with, so. You just work your way around all of the edges and take your time trimming. Trimming is really important, and it will save you a lot of trouble later on trying to get things to line up and match up. Okay, so we are done trimming our petal pieces. Now we're going to move on to our inset circles. And I'm just going to crease these again, finger pressing to find the center marks. Do that both directions. And this is piece N, and color one piece is H. And you're going to finger press both to find the center marks on every side. Now, we're going to lay piece H on top of piece N, and you're going to line up those center marks and pin. And go around to each one, and you'll notice it's not going to lay flat, it is going to stretch a little bit. Just go around to each quadrant and pin. And actually the smaller inset circles are a little bit more difficult than doing larger ones. Actually, just smaller pieces to work with. It can be a little finicky. And now we're just going to work back around the edges, pinning just every so often. Just kind of work quadrant by quadrant and put a few pins in, and we're just going to work our way all the way around the circle. Use as many pins as you need. We're going to speed it up a little because this takes some time. I'm putting quite a few pins in here just to show you how easy it is to get them lined up, and it just makes sewing a lot easier once you get it on the machine, and you don't have to worry about stretching that fabric if you do it beforehand. Okay, all pinned. Now we're going to move on over to the machine and sew around the circle. And we're going to take this really slow. This isn't a race. We're only making 3 of these, so take your time. In this case, we're only making 1 for the wall hanging. And just stop every few stitches. Take your pins out, realign everything. Just making sure to line up the raw edges. As you go. Now, I'm going to be honest, I have done so many of these that I rarely pin. I may put 4 pins in, I may put none in. And if you get going and you find that that's easier for you than pinning, by all means, have at it. But to start with, just to make it easier on yourself, you may want to try it this way first. This will also help you to learn how much stretch and give you need to make everything come out crisp and clean. And you'll notice the H piece is bunched up quite a bit, but I'm making sure to smooth out those creases as I go around the edges. And if you do it slowly and just kind of work your way around, you shouldn't have any problems with any puckering or creases or anything like that. Sometimes you just have to mess with it a little bit to get it to line up. And we're coming to the end. And you will notice when I unfold this, there are going to be a lot of creases. That's just the nature of the beast here. That they're not puckers, they're not, you are going to have a smooth circle, but it looks kind of bad at first. That's why we press things. So just kind of smooth it out, make sure there actually are no creases or puckers. Now we're going to take it over to the ironing board, And this is where your starch comes in handy. You want to spray this pretty liberally. I spray it as I go. So I spray it once, go around, press my my seam allowance towards the circle on this one. This is the only block in this quilt where I press towards, where I should say don't press towards the color one fabric. And I just find that it not only looks a little bit more crisp, but you don't have that seam allowance showing through the light color fabric if you choose a light color fabric. Now if you use a light color fabric for your center, then you may want to press your seam allowance outward. And just work around the edges and really press it, and just kind of work all the way around the very edge. I spray again, and just keep the fabric tight as you go. And eventually you will get all of those creases out. It just may take some time. And this is where the clapper comes in really handy with Inset Circles. So you get a really nice crisp edge on that seam. And get all of those creases out. Okay, and we have an inset circle. Now we're going to move over and trim it. And since you just pressed, you will have to find the center marks again. So just finger press. I know we just pressed it. Hate to put those creases in there, but you really do need them. You can always press it again. Again, find the center mark on your cutting mat. Or if you have another way of doing this, by all means, use whatever way works best for you. Just make sure you're centering the circle. We are all done trimming. We have our center of our flower now. Now we're going to start piecing our flower together. We're going to make 3 strips of petals. Let's start with the top strip, top or bottom, whichever way you want to do it. They're both the same. I'm going to back stitch at the top and bottom. And here is where I was talking about the pressing of the seams towards the color one fabric where it comes in handy. You will notice at the points your lines of stitching will intersect and you'll have a perfect point there where your point of your triangle is, and you can use that as a guide of where to sew your blocks together, and that way you are not cutting off a point of your triangle. And for that reason I like to sew with the triangle on top. So you're going to line up your needle with that intersection of those two lines of stitching, right where I have my finger. And you will get a perfect point every time. And it just helps me to place my finger there as a guide. Okay, 2 strips down. Do the last one. We'll go over and press, and then we'll finish our flower. Just make sure you are placing the triangles in the right direction for them all to be pointing inward towards the center of the flower, which I'm sure you are doing because it's pretty obvious, but just want to throw it out there. Okay, so we've pressed all of our seams open, and now we are sewing our 3 strips together. We're going to line up our seams, and I like to just put a pin in at the seams to make sure they are matching up perfectly. And if they're not perfect, that is okay. It gives it character. But even so, it helps to match them up because it will help you in piecing the rest of the quilt. I'm all about character, but I'm also all about minimizing frustration. And again, just sewing through that intersection of stitching to get my points. Okay, looks pretty good. Now we're going to do the last one. Okay, we are done piecing our flower block. Okay, join me in the next video and we will piece our stems and attach them to our flowers. See you then.